procedure rules of the Council's constitution, subject to the avoidance of undue delay or administrative overhead. The last clause of that amendment, I think it is important that we recognise the fact that this is an informal group, and we don't really want any additional unnecessary expense added in terms of officers having to prepare overly long reports or follow all the normal procedures for having minutes available on the internet for 6 years and so on. And I think it should be broadly follow the rules for normal meetings, but maybe in a slightly more relaxed fashion. That's all I have to say. I would like to propose that motion.
Thank you. Do you have a seconder?
I do have a seconder.
Councillor Clayton.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As far as the proposition is concerned, Mr. Mayor, I've got full regard for the concerns expressed by Councillor Collins and also the evidence given by the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Elaine Silverwood. But for my part, I support fully the proposition because I personally don't want to see the loss of the local plan steering group. I think it's a very useful and worthy committee to have in place. And therefore, I would like to second the proposition, or the amendment to the proposition, that the local plan steering group is retained, but with the amended items that are before you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. We are now speaking to the amendment. Could I just ask that the amendment be read out again, because I think it needs clarification before people actually address what's said.
That this council recommends to the portfolio holder for planning and development that, in the interest of openness and transparency, meetings of the local plan steering group broadly follow the same access rules as all meetings of the council, its committees and subcommittees, as defined in section 1 of part 4E, access to information procedure rules of the council's constitution, subject to the avoidance of undue delay or administrative overhead.
Thank you. Councillor Ahmed.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've got something to say, but just on the clarity of that. The amendment is voting that we keep the steering committee. So the first one that we voted we keep the steering committee, but with open access. Okay, fair enough. We covered this about 3 or 4 days ago in scrutiny, and one of the massive arguments we keep hearing against committees is that we do something to death in a committee, spend hours going through it with all the evidence to hand, and then because you don't get the result you like, you come to council and do it all again. And this is a perfect example of why that's a shambles of an approach. The reason we went through against this in scrutiny, and why we didn't want to make a discussion group like this open to the public and the media, was there was the danger of certain councillors using it for showboating for the press and for their votes for their areas, as opposed to discussing maturely and openly what we wanted to get into the local plan. There was a danger that people, I take Councillor Duffy's point that most of the voting members on the committee are DM trained, but there's an awful lot of people who do turn up that are there to contribute, to join in, and I think if it was open to everyone, there'd be a fear of looking stupid and actually not joining in and not contributing, because they would be conscious of who was watching them in the audience. I think people would become more parochial if they knew that their voters were there, and at the moment, again, most of the discussion is not as parochial as it could be. Some of it is. And I just found it shocking that we haven't done this just a few days ago at length, that we have to do this again tonight. And I'll be voting against the motion as I voted against it a couple of days ago.
Councillor Mulholland, sorry. Mulholland.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, as we all know, this debate started with a question from a member of the public, Mr. Fred Moore. And if I can be honest, at this meeting, which is a public meeting and attended by the press, that is particularly a part that concerns me, because Mr. Moore is now a part of the press. Somebody's decided that somebody who writes blogs and has internet sites is now the press. But truthfully, this, in my view, this isn't a sort of unbiased reporting of something. This is a person's view. It's not an interactive website. It's not. Yeah, I'm just saying this is one person's view. It's not always right. I think sometimes it's dangerous. You know, we've got Queen Elizabeth might not think so, but Judas Eves might agree with me. The magnificent St. Louis might think one thing, but you know, this is what it is. It's a person's view. Now, if I thought, and I've been sort of not slated, but there's been a comment about one of my committees, and I actually took the author to task and explained that he'd slightly got it wrong. That was only a slight, in my opinion, a slight misinterpretation, but he put a whole different cast on it. Now, I know my version's right, but it was never corrected. It's not a big deal, but it was never corrected. Now, as I said before, task and finish groups, working groups, when you're doing work in business, I don't think that's the place for the press or the public. And I have to say, I don't think it's the place for this particular type of members of the press. I've got to be honest about that, I don't. If we're having a discussion about the parking problems in Lytham, I might want to be devil's advocate and say, look, why don't we look at the stretch between the Rat and Parrot, or the Queen's as it is again, up to the assembly rooms, on the green, get it grass-created, let's start parking there. You know, it might get a debate going. I might half mean it, I might just be being devil's advocate. The point is, I can well imagine what's going to be on the internet. And I'm sorry, but I don't think that's conducive to open debate and discussion. If that went through the local steering group, local plan steering group, I'm sure that at some stage it would be discussed at a public meeting, at a meeting that is open to the public. I have no desire to prevent the public coming from meetings, committee meetings or meetings of the council. Why would I? You know, I'm not after doing things in secret, but I think working meetings like that, personally, I think it's desirable and essential, and I think because of the type of the press that we're talking about, I think it's even more so. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Aitken.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to thank Councillor Mulholland for those comments. I agree entirely with him. And I'm afraid I do not agree with the amendment. One of the reasons is that when we have the steering group meetings, councillors are allowed to put their views forward quietly and succinctly. No problem. I'm afraid if there was something that we were discussing which would be parochial to that particular councillor, there are certain councillors in the room who would play to the audience, I'm afraid. And for that reason, I do not agree with the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rose.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, can I just make a point about questions? There seems to be a suggestion that a member of the public's asked a question. I didn't go to last week's ONS. Oh. I didn't know any of the questions that were going to be asked at that meeting. I didn't know any of the questions which were going to be asked at this evening's meeting. So I think that point really needs to be made. I wasn't aware that the question was being asked. So I think it may be a little coincidental. I make that point, and I would just say that in the good old days we used to have a planning committee and it met twice a month. Once a month it met to set policy and to work on the local plan. That was how we did things, and it worked very, very well. And yes, you had occasions when there were sensitive issues, confidential issues, and we have a mechanism at council for that. It's called going into committee, and I think that that is the right mechanism to use. When Councillor Fylde first suggested the LDF meeting, I thought it was an absolutely splendid idea, and I supported him fully. I really felt it was, in this awful time when there isn't a lot of participation, a very good way of including people in the debate and making sure that you got the views of all the borough. Unfortunately, it's had problems, and that's why I would welcome this being looked at again. It's had problems, and it's had some very heated debates. It's had heated debates about housing numbers, employment lands, and the various options that we've put into the local plan. And where I've had problems is it's not been open and transparent. We've had minutes done of the meetings, you go to the next meeting, you look at the minutes, and some of the more controversial things have not been put into the minutes. They've been queried. We've had another long and heated debate. You get to the following meeting, and still the first item has not been minuted. And this is where I think we have problems. If it was a properly constructed meeting, whether it's open to the public or not, and it was properly minuted, we would be able to pick up points that have been made. And that is what I've had against the meeting. It seems to have been very selective what's been minuted. I will just pick up on a couple of things that councillors have said. Councillor Mulholland has said he would like to keep things as they are, or he won't attend the meetings. Well, I have to say, Councillor Mulholland, I don't think I've really seen you.
No.
Well, I don't think I've seen you at many of those meetings, if at all any. Councillor Ahmed talked about involving people, spreading democracy. Well, I don't see how that has happened, because when things have been discussed and they've not been minuted, I don't see how that does really open things up or spread democracy. I also have to pick up on something else he said, and this isn't the first time these comments have been made about independents leaving meetings or not turning up. I will speak to you outside the meeting on this. I do think, again, it's misleading information. It hasn't happened. If he can give me any evidence of that type of behaviour, I'd like to go into it with him. But certainly I wish he wouldn't stand up and make statements like that if he hasn't got anything to substantiate things. I actually feel that this amendment is the right way forward. I think that we should be having a more transparent way of dealing with our local plan, and then perhaps we wouldn't have all our communities rising up against it as they are doing at the moment. I've never seen such a groundswell of opinion against what's being put into a local plan, and I think that you really, perhaps had you been more open, could have dealt with issues like that in the first place. I will be supporting this amendment, and I hope other people will too.
Thank you, Councillor Oates. I would just like to support Councillor Mulholland. I don't believe that he said...
Sorry, it's hard to take Councillor Mrs Oates serious, Mr Mayor, when she doesn't know what people have said in this meeting. Sorry, I think that isn't what Councillor Mulholland actually said. I would just like to say that I, like many others here, probably don't know what was asked at the community focus meeting just a few days ago. So I can understand that people, I believe a question was asked, but many of us are not aware of what was asked or what the answer was. So I think it would be irrelevant to take that as part of this debate. I do think that the steering group is very useful, has been very useful.
But like others, I realise there have been many frustrations, and particularly with minute taking and proper accurate minutes being taken. And I think a lot of the problems could have been resolved if there were proper minutes taken and those were available to the public, and then maybe the public would not express the desire to be there to hear what was actually said at the meeting. And and just to answer Councillor Armitt, who talks about parochialness, or whatever the word is, I think you'll find that parochial instincts come out when you're under constant threat, as many of our rural areas are, and I would ask you to bear that in mind. Thank you. Does anybody else wish to speak? Okay. Oh, Councillor Collins. Yeah.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. As proposed in the original motion, I believe I've got the right to speak now. I haven't got an awful lot to add, but I'd just like to ask a question. What is everyone afraid of? There won't be many members of the public there. There might not be many members of the press there. There might be Fred Moore there and one or two others. But if he is there, I feel it will be serving a useful purpose, and that perhaps the minutes will, the official minutes that is, will reflect what has been said in those meetings. I have been very, very frustrated. I've had to fight to get my name, not what I said, but the fact that I've been at the meeting. And there's other people who haven't been at the meeting, have been down as being there. It does serve a useful purpose, I agree, but if the portfolio holder has established this committee, this steering group, I feel they should take on board what people are saying more. I feel that I've really struggled to get my point across to him. There's been times right at the start of the process when he's been blissfully unaware of what's been going on in other authorities. It's been a battle, and I feel that if they were open, if they're open to the public, if the public could see what was going on, then perhaps it wouldn't be such a battle. Thank you.
Thank you. Does Councillor Fydler, do you wish to speak? No, he can't. Oh. Right. Okay. Sorry? Well, I did ask if anybody wished to speak, and I would have assumed you would speak, but...
Just for clarification... Just for clarification of our constitution, the original proposer of the original motion has the final say on the amendment. I think before Councillor Collins spoke, the Mayor did check that there was no other speakers. So, in accordance with our constitution, it is now a vote on the amendment. However, the chairman, the Mayor of this committee, does have the right to override that.
Thank you. Councillor Fydler, do you think you've something to add to the debate?
No.
Mr. Mayor, to some possibly yes, to others possibly no.
In your opinion?
When I saw the notice of motion, I really was very surprised and very disappointed. Going back to when the steering group was formed several years ago, I think members of this council realised the nature of the cabinet governance of Fylde Council, and I was very much concerned that it hadn't to be an executive decision, the local plan hadn't to be an executive decision of a particular cabinet member. and not simply for inclusion reasons, but with all those people who've been involved in planning and are a member of the planning committee are often dictated to by whether it's region or central government and told to apply various policies. And people have no ownership of those policies. And I thought it extremely important that members of this council had an opportunity to understand how policies evolved and hopefully had an element of ownership of those policies. And that was the intention several years ago when I set up the steering group. And that's why the DM committee, plus the chairman of the LSP, was the people who formed that committee or steering group.
Could you speak to the amendment, Councillor Fylde?
I will speak to the amendment. I find part of the amendment quite cheerful, for it recognises that the steering group in part does have a significant role to play. The second part, where Councillor Duffy is trying to say it should take on a similar role or have a similar position within the council as other committees, then of course that's fundamentally a no. This steering group is not within the jurisdiction of this council. It's a volunteer, it's a group of people who are invited to give the portfolio holder a address. But I must make a comment about Councillor Oates and the Vice Chair, the Deputy Mayor. The Deputy Mayor makes some very stinging criticisms of the way events leading to the way Kirkham Triangle was debated and the conclusions that came. And I think she is misguided and jaundiced in the way she described that. The first attempt at describing the Kirkham Triangle certainly was a majority decision to try and exclude Kirkham Triangle on planning reasons if the officers could accommodate that amount of housing elsewhere. 4 weeks later, the officers came back and said they couldn't, and we had a second meeting where the Deputy Mayor wasn't there, and we reversed that situation. Council also makes several points about there's been a groundswell of opinion against decisions made by the steering group. Two points, Mr. Mayor, can I make? That is the local plan preferred option. You can see how thick it is. And the majority, the vast majority of this document had consensus throughout. The vast majority of that. It was only when we came to the concept of the Kirkham Triangle did things start to hit the buffers and things go wrong. And the proposer, Councillor Collins and Councillor Oates, have made note of this minority report. A minority report signed by all the independents because they didn't agree with the way the Kirkham Triangle especially was described in the preferred option. Can I say this minority report was the reason why, in my opinion, the council has been polarised, because this minority report is politically overt, it is planning inept, and many of the suggestions raised in this minority report was dealt with by the inspector in the Moorbeck Lane public inquiry and dismissed.
Councillor Fylde, are you speaking to the amendment?
I'm speaking to the amendment.
I've been very gracious and allowed you to speak.
You have. Can I just make one further point? Can I congratulate Councillor Oates, and I'm sure all my Conservative colleagues will join me in recognising that she isn't always right, simply in the context that when it came to the minority report on the Kirkham Triangle, it was a question, she stated publicly, it would be over a dead body. To see her alive and kicking now is a benefit to all of us, I'm sure. So, in that instance, I'm glad you were wrong in that context. Mr. Mayor, I'll be voting against the amendment. It does recognise that the steering group has a function to, in the long scheme of things, in developing the local plan. But as pointed out by several speakers, this was debated at scrutiny, and the aspect of a working group having to be open to the public has been voted on and agreed, and therefore I support that aspect of the steering group. Therefore, I will be voting against the amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Fydler. Right, no. Can we move to the vote then, please? Councillor Duffy.
I think it's quite important that the public know who would. Sorry. I think it's quite important that the public know who would prefer to have openness and transparency, and who would prefer to not. I won't use the
You're
word
asking
keep
for
things
a
secret,
recorded vote.
Yeah, I would like a recorded vote on this.
Do we have the required number of...
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. In that case, can we have a recorded vote, please? Oh, could you read the amendment, please?
Okay, the amendment is that this council recommends to the portfolio holder for planning and development that, in the interests of openness and transparency, meetings of the local plan steering group broadly follow the same access rules as all meetings of the council, its committees and subcommittees, as defined in section 1 of part 4E, access to information procedure rules of the council's constitution, subject to the avoidance of undue delay or administrative overhead.
Thank you. Yes. It's a long agenda.
Is it possible to do what has been asked with our present constitution first, and secondly, if we have to follow precisely those terms, I presume that then agendas will have to have a fortnight's lead-in time, that nothing else can be introduced within that time, and it will reduce the flexibility, therefore, of that meeting. Could you confirm just what this amendment means as specified?
Thank you.
I think if I understand Councillor Duffy correctly, he's indicating that the meeting itself should follow broadly the same rules, but I think from what Councillor Duffy was saying in his introduction to the amendment, that and the actual last sentence that says subject to avoidance of undue administrative overhead, he's suggesting that it doesn't strictly follow the rules of publication, time frames. It doesn't become a formal meeting, but it's treated in that way in terms of public attendance and in terms of the minutes themselves being a more accurate record. I'm sure Councillor Duffy will correct me if I've got that wrong.
Could you confirm that, Councillor Duffy?
Yeah, I mean, my intention by adding the bit at the end, subject to, I don't want it causing any more delay, I don't want it having any extra burdens of cost, and if the principle of the meeting's being open to the public, the minutes are already published anyway, if the principle of the meetings being open to the public could be agreed, then I'd be quite happy for all the details around that to be just dealt with in whatever way the portfolio holder wished them to be.
Thank you.
So no extra burden, no extra delay.
Thank you. Can we move to the vote then, please?
Mr Mayor, if members could indicate either they are for, against or abstaining, please. Councillor Aitken. Against. Councillor Ackroyd. Against. Councillor Andrews. Against. Councillor Armitt. Against. Councillor Susan Ashton. Against. Councillor Tim Ashton. Against. Councillor Beckett. For. Councillor Brickles. For. Councillor Buckley. Against. Councillor Chad. For. Councillor Chew. For. Councillor Clayton. For. Councillor Collins. For. Councillor Craig Wilson. Against. Councillor Cunningham. Against. Councillor John Davis. For. Councillor Leonard Davis. Against. Councillor Donaldson. Against. Councillor Duffy. For. Councillor Eastham. Against. Councillor Eaves. Against. Councillor Zachary. Councillor Fydler. Against. Councillor Ford. For. Councillor Goodrich. Against. Councillor Hardy. For. Councillor Howard Henshaw. For. Councillor Karen Henshaw. For. Councillor Hodgson. Against. Councillor Hopwood. For. Councillor Jakes. Councillor Mulholland. Councillor Barbara Nash. Councillor Edward Nash. Councillor Oates. Councillor Pounder. Councillor Redcliffe. Councillor Rigby. Councillor Singleton. Councillor Speak. Councillor Threlfall. And Councillor Wilder.
You haven't done.
Oh, sorry. Mr. Mayor.
4.
Deputy Mayor. 4.
That's all right. Thank you. Right. Right.
The amendment is lost, Mr. Mayor. There were 18 for, 25 against, and 1 member abstaining.
Thank you. So we now return to the substantive motion. Councillor Oates.
I'd like to move a further amendment, Mr. Mayor, and it is that the operation of the local plan steering group be reviewed by the portfolio holder. I do have a seconder.
Thank you, Councillor Oates.
I'm asking for this in light of the debate. I think that there are a number of people who realise that there are problems with the present system, and if it can be looked at and improved, then I think it may go some way to providing a much better facility for the council. I think things like minutes and votes are very, very important. I think when people don't take votes and we don't then have minutes done, then that is when you get poor minuting and a lot of queries about decision making. So that's why I would like the portfolio holder to agree to look at this again. I accept the weaknesses in the present system and come up with some kind of improvements.
Thank you, Councillor Oates. Who's the seconder, please? Councillor Collins?
Yeah, I'll second the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that allowed?
I think so, isn't it? Can he second it? You were the first motion. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyone to speak?
Does anybody wish to speak to that amendment? Councillor Armitt?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sometimes it gets very confusing when you get people who are proposing we close down a committee and seconding a motion that we change the committee as it exists and then speaking for...
Just go with it, Councillor Armitt.
Yeah, it's all over the place and shows committees. Okay. I'm not sure how long it is since people worked in business. I'm not sure which businesses people worked in, but there are great benefits to having working groups, to having task groups, to having things that can get on with things, get focused on the job. Then there are other meetings which you minute, which are formal meetings, that you behave in a structured way, like this one is, that we have a limited amount of time, that we speak in an ordered manner, that we speak in a controlled manner. That's great. Those meetings are fine, they're minuted. This was set up as a working group. That's all it was ever established as to do. It was set up to get the people together to have open and frank discussion, not hindered by rules, not hindered by minutes, not hindered by being scared that they might say something that be quoted directly back at them. It's an open working meeting to allow people to come together to work, and that's what it's for. Let's keep it that way, and let's keep it in the way that is, to me, being effective. It may not have got the results people like, and that's why it's been seen as ineffective, but it seems to be working.
Thank
I'll
you.
be working against this one as well.
Thank you. Councillor Mulholland. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Could the officer just read the amendment to us again, the wording of the amendment?
That the operation of the local plan steering group be reviewed by the portfolio holder.
I've just spent an hour of my life, an hour that I'll never get back listening to this tripe. What on earth's that about? Whether you vote for it or against it, what is that about?
Thank you, Councillor Mulholland. Councillor Fydler. No, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter.
Councillor Holland, you eloquently summarised what I was going to say. There's been...
Does that mean you don't need to speak, Councillor Fydler?
What I was going to say. The request to review the workings of the steering group is, okay, I'm quite happy to review it, but in what context? And the justification for the amendment seems to have come from comments made that one, minutes aren't correct, and secondly, as Councillor Collins puts it, he struggles to make his point known. Well, can I just inform Council that I believe the nitpicking that's gone on this evening, and most of it stems from Councillor Collins, because he had a point and first raised, and I give him credit for it, he's one of the only councillors present who's actually had a positive input into the steering group, because he first drew attention of the steering group to the significance of Junction 2 on the M55, that this would become a strategic change in the fortunes of Fylde. And I agree with him. The very first time he raised that issue, it wasn't subsequently minuted. And in the following meeting, Councillor Collins, and if you haven't witnessed any of his tantrums, then this time
Stick to the point, Councillor.
This time yet. But we had a considerable length tantrum which said, you haven't recorded my comments from the previous meeting. And he didn't have to struggle to have them corrected. I apologised to him, and the officers made the recommendation to include what Councillor Collins has said. So in that context, he was right. He did contribute positively, and I feel that's the substance of criticism that councillors are making. And really, Liz, when I look at the things that are wrong within this council, I expect, and every council should have an effective opposition, but when you resort, and the mayor made points about the parochialism being a sort of natural place to retreat to, we as a council were severely reprimanded, criticised by the Planning Advisory Service in the executive summary of delivery of planning in Fylde. And that was because that rural members were tended to be parochial and reluctant to take on the borough-wide responsibilities that we expect of you.
Councillor Fydler,
but in terms of reviewing the workings of the steering group, then what's been described is nitpicking compared to the fundamental polarisation of this council in terms of Conservatives on one side and the Independents on the other. And the people who voted on the last amendment, those who voted for that amendment, are the same people who signed this minority report that I have said to you previously, Mr. Mayor, this evening. This report, many of the aspects of it have been reviewed by the inspector at Morbeck Lane and dismissed as non-planning items.
Councillor Fydler.
I don't think it's worth taking the vote. I am quite prepared to review in my own way, but I really think it's a waste of time to take a vote.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Duffy, did you want to speak?
Yeah, I will speak, but I'll keep it very short.
Thank you.
And I'll just propose that we go straight to the vote.
Thank you. Can we don't require a recorded vote, do we? Thank you. Okay, so the amendment is...
The amendment is that the operation of the local plan steering group be reviewed by the portfolio holder.
All those in favour, can you please show? Oh, come on, do you know what we're doing here? Come on.
Councillor Power doesn't want to put his hand up.
Well done.
21.
Councillor Fydler, are you not in favour? Sorry, I thought... Right, thank you. Against?
Against. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So the amendment
Just being obtuse.
The amendment is successful.
The amendment is successful. I think that's the end of that item. Thank you.
Sorry?
We have to vote on the substantive motion.
Oh,
Still
sorry.
have to go back and vote on the substantive motion.
Right, okay, we still have the substantive motion on the table. Can I move that we move...
No, the amendment becomes a substantive motion.
Oh, the amendment...
Sorry.
Okay, the amendment becomes a substantive motion. Can I move that we go straight to the vote on that? Come on, stick your hand up. Just for and against, sorry, for... I've lost the will to live.
I'll remind members once again of their constitution. I think I feel an email coming on tomorrow. Once an amendment has been successful, according to your constitution, it becomes a substantive motion.
It does.
But you voted for the amendment to become the substantive motion. Therefore, a further vote is required in order to make sure that what is now the substantive motion, which is the amendment, is voted on.
Thank you. Those in favour?
That's clearly carried.
It's clearly carried. Anybody wishes to say they're against? No. Can we please move on? Thank you. Would like... Can you record that, please? Right. Oh. Agenda item... I haven't had my tea yet. Agenda item 8. Dispensation to allow town and parish councillors, the rural members, to participate in the council tax reduction scheme item. I'd like to invite Councillor Reeves to introduce this item. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Agenda item 8, the purpose of the report is to ensure that councillors who are also town and parish councillors can participate in the discussion about and vote on the item in relation to council tax reduction scheme, with reference to the allocation of grants to town and parish councils. The report recommends that the council gives a dispensation to those councillors who are both borough and town and parish councillors and who have requested a dispensation to participate in the debate and vote on this matter for this item. I move this, Mr. Mayor, and I do have a seconder.
Thank you. Councillor Buckley, are you seconding?
Happy to second that, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Does anybody wish to speak? We do have a list of who's put the names forward, I believe. Would you?
Mr. Mayor, if I just quickly run through the list, these councillors have all made a request in writing in advance of the meeting. Councillor Ed Nash, Councillor Karen Henshaw, Councillor Ford, Councillor Chew, Councillor Jakes, Silverwood, Nulty, Singleton, Hodgson, Speak, Ackroyd, Wilder, Brickles, Beckett, Chedd, Clayton, Fydler, Odes, Pounder, Threlfall, Hardy, Rigby, and also Councillor Little, but Councillor Little isn't here. Okay.
Thank you. Does anybody wish to speak on this item? No, thank you. Can we take a vote then? All those in favour of that dispensation? Oh, it's nice to see that. Thank you. I presume there's nobody against. Thank you. Agenda item 9, invitation to accept the appointment of Mayor. You can have it. Thank you. For 2014-15. I'd like to invite Councillor John Davies to introduce this item.
you, Mr Mayor. It gives me great pleasure to propose that the Council invites Councillor Kevin Eastham to accept the election by the Council at the 2014 annual meeting as Mayor of the Borough of Fylde for the ensuing municipal year.
Thank you.
Yes, I have
Do
a seconder.
We have a seconder. Thank you. Councillor Henshaw, Howard Henshaw.
It gives me great pleasure to second the nomination.
Thank you. Does anybody wish to speak? Can we take a vote on that? All in favour? Thank you. Sorry. Yeah. You didn't. Go on, quick.
Well, I thought I had to accept the invitation, so I do that with pleasure. And thank you.
After this meeting, do you want to accept that invitation?
Unless there are any amendments.
Thank you.
And I will, as I say, reserve to say the necessary things in May. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Congratulations. Agenda item 10. The Fylde Borough Council schedule of meetings 14-15. I'd like to invite Councillor Eaves to introduce this item.
Thank you very much again, Mr Mayor, and it is quite simply to say that the purpose of this report is to approve the schedule of meeting dates for the proposed forthcoming municipal year 2014-15.
Thank you.
The schedule is with all members this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have a seconder?
I do have a seconder.
Councillor Fazakas.
I am that seconder, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Does anybody want to? Oh, Councillor Armitt. Yeah.
Mr Mayor, just a quick one on this. I appreciate most councillors from children who are left home, and there's not much of an impact here. And I think it would be nice if we could drive the council to get, one member under 40 possibly next year, and more people with jobs as well. But I look at this and my heart drops again. And I have mentioned to officers before, can we try and schedule particularly the key meetings not in the middle of the school holidays? Because straight away I know all the ones I'm missing next year, because sadly I've got children. And I look at the two in the end of July, straight in the middle of the summer holidays, both the DM and the council. There's no council in September when we're all back at school again. And can we just try and think about, if we ever want to attract councillors with kids or of that age to come in, or people with jobs, that we schedule these when the school holidays are not on. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rhodes. Perhaps it's good as well that you didn't get the microphone, Councillor Rhodes. Thank you. Does anybody else have any comments? In which case, can we, I presume somebody might look at those dates and see if there's anything we can do, but can we move to the vote on that, please? All in favour? Sorry. Anybody against? Thank you. Agenda item 11, latest financial forecast update, position at January 2014. I'd like to invite Councillor Karen Buckley to introduce this item. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Members will find this report on page 12 of the agenda papers. I'd like to briefly take you through the latest financial forecast update